Welcome back to Nonstop Recap. Today we'll be going over the 2002 erotic thriller Unfaithful. Connie Sumner leads a happy average life looking after her dog, her son Charlie, and her husband Edward. While she helps Charlie get ready for school one morning, she and Edward have a brief argument about stock purchases before he leaves with Charlie. It's unusually windy outside and he suggests she stay home from work, but she has things to take care of and says she'll be fine. As she later rushes through the windswept streets of New York, Connie is pelted by wind-blown garbage so aggressively she becomes disoriented. In the chaos, she runs into a French book dealer named Paul, knocking them both over. They help each other collect their belongings, and Paul tries unsuccessfully to hail a cab before noticing a bloody wound on Connie's knee. He invites her into his apartment to clean up, and she sees a taxi drive by just before deciding to go with him. Inside, she cleans her wound while Paul makes tea. Connie uses Paul's phone to call Charlie, and Paul offers to let Connie take a book on her way out. He directs her specifically to a copy of the Rubaiyat, which she takes with her. At home, Charlie takes pictures of Connie's wounds, which he later shows to Edward. Connie tells Edward about meeting Paul, and Edward jokingly asks if he was good-looking. Connie tucks the book away on a shelf and finds Edward in the bedroom playing with a new camcorder. They begin to make love, but Charlie interrupts from the other room. The next day, Connie takes the book down from the shelf and Paul's number falls out. Connie phones Paul from Grand Central Station and he invites her over. After seductively removing her coat, Paul brings Connie a cup of coffee and shows her a book of Braille. He holds her hand for a minute, but she gets uncomfortable and leaves. Connie visits Edward at work, passing his colleague Bill on the way. She gives Edward a new sweater and he asks about her work at the auction house. She claims to have spent the day trying to get fundraising from a friend named Bob Gaylord. Later, she washes dishes and becomes fairly lost in fantasy. The next day, she returns to Paul's to bring him muffins. They share a slow dance and Paul tells her he hasn't been with many women. Things start to get steamy, but the recording skips and Connie changes her mind. She tries to leave, but when she comes back to get her coat, Paul scoops her up and takes her to bed. She is shaking with both fear and excitement, and they sleep together passionately and at times violently. On the train home, she seems to both laugh and cry over the encounter. Later, Edward runs into Bob Gaylord and mentions Connie's fundraising efforts, only to learn that Bob's been out of town and that Connie was lying. That night, Edward is standoffish but says nothing about Bob. He asks Connie if she loves him, and she reassures him before taking a snow globe from the collection in their den. Scenes of happy family moments are then intercut with scenes of her continuing affair with Paul, at the end of which he draws a small key on her hip while she sleeps. Connie and Paul have lunch together where they see two guys arguing over the check. Paul kisses Connie in public when one of the guys turns around and sees them, revealing himself to be Bill. Connie later takes a steamy bath when she sees the drawing on her hip. She manages to scrub it off just before Edward enters and joins her in the tub. He tries to heat things up, but she says she's cold and goes to bed. The next day, Edward suggests they have lunch together. Connie says she can't because she has plans to get a facial. While they talk, he notices she's purchased a new negligee and new shoes. Edward calls the salon to confirm Connie's appointment, but learns that she isn't on their schedule. On her way to meet Paul, Connie runs into her friends Tracy and Sally, who insist she join them for coffee. Connie phones Paul to let him know where she is, and he shows up to the cafe where they hook up in the bathroom. Afterward, Tracy reveals to Connie and Sally that she once had an affair and that cheating always ends disastrously. Connie goes back to Paul's and half-heartedly suggests they end things, but reveals that she's becoming obsessed with him. Meanwhile, Edward fires Bill for being disloyal to the company, and Bill criticizes Edward for not recognizing the disloyalty under his own roof. Edward decides to hire a private investigator named Frank to have Connie followed. That night, after Connie ruins dinner, Edward tells her about Bill and lets her know he'll be going to Chicago in the morning for work. As he gets to his hotel the next day, day, Connie puts on brand new lingerie for her next date with Paul. She and Paul have wild relations in the middle of a movie theater, and Frank photographs them as they're leaving. She goes with Paul back to his place and falls asleep on the couch, forgetting to pick up Charlie from school. That night, she weeps with guilt and tries to call Paul, but he doesn't answer. Edward meets with Frank upon his return, and Frank shows him the pictures. He says they usually meet around the middle of the day and gives Edward Paul's address. After abruptly crying in the middle of the grocery store, Connie starts to drive home but takes a reckless turn toward the city to meet Paul. She tries to call him on the way, but he again doesn't answer. When she gets to his neighborhood, she sees him walking with another woman. Connie quickly parks and chases after the couple, following them to a bookstore where she watches them from behind a shelf before physically attacking Paul. They argue in the elevator of his apartment building, and she accuses him of lying about his history with women. He calls her out on lying to her own family and then insults her suburban lifestyle. She tries to storm off, but he forces himself on her in the stairwell until she eventually gives in. Afterward, Paul sees Edward watching his apartment from the street below. Edward starts to walk away, and Connie runs out just in time to escape his notice before he turns back and approaches the door. He gets into the building as an old man is leaving and goes upstairs to confront Paul. Paul invites him in for a drink, stopping to consider a knife on the counter before pouring Edward a glass of vodka. Edward presses him for details on the affair, growing more agitated as the conversation continues. When he walks into the bedroom, he discovers the snow globe from earlier. It reveals it was a gift he gave Connie, and he becomes dizzy at the news that she's re-gifted it to Paul. Dazed, he beats Paul in the head with the snow globe, killing him almost instantly. He covers the body with a sheet and seems prepared to call 911, but changes his mind. He instead starts wiping his prints from the scene and begins to move the body when the phone rings. The answering machine picks up, and he hears Connie's voice as she tells Paul that she needs to end things out of love for Edward and Charlie. Edward finishes scrubbing the floor and wraps Paul's body in a rug. He erases Paul's voicemail before leaving, but doesn't notice Connie's number written down next to the phone. While Connie dresses Charlie in a bunny costume for a school play, Edward drags Paul's body into the elevator. It malfunctions and gets stuck, forcing him to laboriously lift the body out from between floors. He carries the body outside and puts it in his trunk before driving to the school, where he cleans himself up and changes shirts. He joins Connie in the auditorium, and she lovingly takes his hand in hers as they watch Charlie's terrible play together. After the play, another parent hits Edward's car, and he struggles to close the trunk again. The other driver insists on assessing the damage, but Edward loses his temper and yells at him. Later that night, while Connie sleeps, Edward drives to a landfill and ditches the body, burying it under a thin layer of garbage. He gets his car washed, takes a shower, and lies awake watching Connie sleep. In the morning, Connie sees Edward wearing mismatched shoes and tells him that she awoke in the middle of the night but couldn't find him. Edward becomes distraught and asks Connie if she's truly happy, but she insists he's worried over nothing. Edward starts to doze off on the train to work, but startles himself awake with memories of the murder. Meanwhile, Charlie alerts Connie that the NYPD are outside their house. Connie meets Detective Dean and his partner downstairs, and they tell her they found her number on Paul's desk. They ask how Connie knew him, and she says that he was just selling her some books. Detective Dean informs Connie that Paul's family has reported him missing, surprising Connie with the reveal that Paul is separated yet still married. When the detectives leave, Connie trashes her copy of the Rubaiyat. Later, the family goes out for pizza, and Charlie mentions the cops to Edward. Edward asks Connie why they would question her, but she tells him the same lie she told them. He drops the issue, and they continue a seemingly normal life. until a worker at the landfill discovers Paul's body. The detectives show up to inform Connie and Edward of Paul's death before asking more questions about how Connie knew Paul. She claims they met at a Juilliard fundraiser, a lie that Edward surprisingly corroborates. She also claims that she's never been to Paul's neighborhood, but the detectives reveal she got a parking ticket near his place 4 weeks ago. When they finally leave, Connie sobs alone on the porch. While taking Edward's clothes to the dry cleaner, Connie finds Frank's pictures in Edward's pocket. She freaks out but plays it cool later when she and Edward have friends over. Their friends start looking at their snow globe collection, and Connie sees that the snow globe she'd given Paul has been returned. She puts the pieces together and shares a tense stare down with Edward. When their friends leave, Connie asks Edward directly if he did anything to Paul. Edward gradually loses his temper as he confronts Connie about her affair, finally screaming that he hates her and would rather have killed her instead. They both start crying, and he later tries to sit with her, but she walks away. Later, Charlie wets the bed, and Connie tries to comfort him, saying she and Edward will always be there for him. Connie and Edward go back to pretending things are normal, with Edward teaching Charlie piano while Connie goes through a photo album. They stop dead when they hear sirens passing by, but it's a false alarm. Connie picks up the snow globe and finds a hidden compartment. Inside, she finds a picture of her and Edward with baby Charlie and a loving note from Edward. That night, she throws Frank's pictures in the fire while wishing she'd taken the taxi that passed when she first went upstairs with Paul. Edward tells Connie that he's willing to confess to the murder, but she tells him not to. They go through the motions of a normal life until one night, Connie suggests running away. She dreams of the life they could have together in Mexico, and Edward comforts her as she weeps. As they sit together at the changing streetlight, we see that he's stopped in front of the police station. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more.